So I'm going to introduce our first speaker today, Doug Burton. Doug is the owner of Saltworks Digital, and he is also the current president of Utah Independent Business Coalition. Doug's got more than 2 decades of experience in developing and managing websites and digital platforms. He's developed web and interactive content for a number of both big and small companies. Some of the bigger ones have included Quaker Oatmeal, Kroger, Dove Soap, Huggies Diapers, Clorox, and as well as for several hundreds other small businesses and startups, including my own office a few years ago. So I'm a satisfied customer and heartily recommend Doug for everything he does. And he's just generally one of the nicest guys you're ever going to meet. So he really is. So without further ado, Doug, take it away.
Okay, thank you everybody and welcome. So quick show of hands here. I imagine most of you do, but who has a website that you manage or that your organization has, or a personal website? So hold your hands up if you have a website. Okay. Now, for the people who held your hand up, how many have someone who manages it for you? A company that, all right, yeah, okay, fair enough, cool. How many manage it yourself? A lot. Okay, so let me count. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The majority, like 75% of you, manage it yourself. And let me guess, that's probably your favorite thing to do. This is the reason why you got into business, right? And the business that you're in is to manage your own website, right? That's exactly what you wanted to do. Oh, okay, cool. So if that's not the case, you're not alone, right? Because a lot of people, it's like me with accounting. I hate managing accounting. That's why I have somebody else do it for me. I find there's 2 or 3 schools of thought for people who manage websites themselves when it comes to cybersecurity. There's a couple of attitudes that I notice over and over again, and I've been in this group. 20 years ago when I was first getting out of sort of advertising and marketing and starting in IT, starting with building websites and with marketing, I was in this group. So this is the group which is, I know there's a big risk, but I'm going to chance it, right, when it comes to cybersecurity. I think I'll be okay. It's this approach, right? You're just going to leave it to chance, right? That's a risky approach, but people have been known to do that. Then there's this approach, which is, I don't think it can happen to me, right? I think most cyber attacks happen to big businesses. I don't need to worry about it because it's not going to happen to me. I'm a little guy. My website just started. I'm just on the map, and I don't need to worry about it. But the fact is, 70% of cyber attacks target small businesses. So we're going to talk today about website security for small business. Ben Clapp, our other speaker, our headliner, is going to speak about cybersecurity in general. I'm going to focus sort of micro-focused on websites because I think it is your most important digital touch point. So I want you to vote on this. How often do you think a cyber attack is attempted on the average small business website? So do you think who thinks it's 5 to 10 times a year that a cyber attack is attempted? Who thinks it's 5 to 10 times a month? Okay, 5 to 10 times a week, and more. So the actual answer is between 10 and 100 times a day, your website someone's trying to break into your website and they're hammering your login page over and over and over again, trying to guess your password and your username and your password. Now, it's not a hacker there sitting there typing everything in manually. They're using server farms and bots and automated tools to go through a list of known easy passwords. And if your website is, like your website, Jason, is woodlandadvisors.co, right? So they're going to use Woodland Advisors as the username. They're going to try Woodland. They're going to try Advisors. All the obvious things, Woodland admin. If they get your username, if they can guess your username, or it's very, very easy, you're giving them sort of 1/2 of the password already. So one of the things you want to make sure that you do with your website is make sure your username is also fairly complex. I don't think you need to go as far as making it a series of random numbers and letters, but at least make it something other than admin, right? Because that's the first thing that they try. So here are the most common website cyber threats. Let's talk about what things you need to kind of have on your radar and know about. Some of these are more focused on medium-sized businesses, but this one is one that happens a lot to small businesses. And the thing I was talking about hackers trying to just continually break into your website through the admin panel, that's called a brute force attack. So they'll set up server farms and they'll just try to crack your password, just trying it all day long with thousands and tens of thousands of combinations. A DDoS attack, I won't get into what DDoS stands for. Does anybody know, by the way? Distributed denial of service attack. That's right. You won't remember that, right? I can barely remember it myself. All right. So that's an attempt by attackers to flood your website with fake traffic. You don't see that a lot with small companies, but as your brand becomes more popular and people know about your brand, you'll start to see that more and more. Malware, so attackers can get access, if they get access to your website, and they'll get in and damage your systems. And even worse, they will create fake pages to skim data from visitors to your website. So this is a way that phishing is integrated with your website. So very, very important that you don't get your website compromised. What's the cost of an attack on a small business website? Well, if you ask Hiscox's cyber readiness report, if you look at that, for 2021, they estimated the cost for the average small business to be $25,000, just over $25,000. According to another report, Kaspersky IT, $105,000. So that's the cost of restoring your site, downtime, lost business. So what's the average downtime if a website gets attacked? If you have a recent backup of your site, a recent restore point, you might be back up within a day or a few hours. If not, I've seen it take a few weeks if someone's website has to be rebuilt. The average amount of downtime is 7.5 days, by the way, for small businesses. This is another one that a lot of people don't know about, is that if your website gets compromised in a cyber attack, Google actually penalizes you with lower search rankings. Google tries to deliver the best quality websites for people when they search for something, and so if your website has malicious code on it, they don't want people going to it, and that makes a lot of sense. That's actually a very good thing that Google does. But you think, okay, if my website gets compromised, if I just have somebody clean it up, get the website back online, I'll be back to normal, right, within a few days. Well, actually, 45% of business owners with hacked sites said their traffic never returned to its pre-hacking levels, even after cleaning it. And their search rankings also didn't return to what they were. You've got the factor of lost trust and reputation, something that you need to be concerned about. 1 in 4 people say that they stopped doing business with a company that was reported being hacked. And if your credit card was stolen from a website or from a company, would you continue to do business with them? You might, if it's something that's an essential service like Amazon, right? But it's something that people are kind of addicted to. But if it's a small business, you can't afford to take that risk that they would stop doing business with you. And then liability is the other one. So liability, what is the cost of that? 9 in 10 people agree that companies are financially liable to their customers after a data breach. So all of this is super scary, but what I want to say is there is good news. This is like, okay, fire hose of information. I know it's a threat. What do I do about it? The good news is I'm going to tell you how you can make your website 1,000 times more secure. And you can actually do this if you're managing your site on your own. A lot of this you can do on your own. You don't necessarily have to hire a firm to help you manage this. It's a little scary, but you can navigate it, and we're going to give you 8 tips that will essentially walk you through it. Okay, so we're ready for the 8? First one is observe good password hygiene. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, that means using strong passwords. And we've heard this before, years ago you could use anything, all lowercase, the word Mustang as a password. Now you've got to have a uppercase letter, a hieroglyph. You've got to have all these special characters, all of that. So here is sort of a short list of the most hacked passwords. Does anybody here, and don't be embarrassed, raise your hand if you've ever used any password that had any of these words or any combination of these words in them. I actually had a client that used, and we of course changed it when they came on board with this, but they used "let me in 3" as their password, right? It's one of the most hacked passwords, and of course all the numbers, they're gonna determine that. So what are other easily hacked passwords? You might think a phrase like the name of your favorite movie or something like that would be a good option. Here are some passwords that people have used that thinking it was a strong password that actually wasn't. This is one that I kind of like. You can relate to that. Of course, this one is, for a long time. Here's one I like. For Home Alone fans, and this is probably my favorite. Okay, so strong password. You know what a strong password is. It looks like this, right? And everybody hates these passwords. You hate typing them in. If you ever had to type this in manually, especially looking at your phone and then typing it, right, it's murder. So what do? We use a password manager. That's how we get around that. This is what we do. We use LastPass. I know a lot of people like 1Password. Some people use Keeper. There's a lot of good password vaults out there and password managers. But that's essential to keeping your passwords protected, in our opinion. And I don't know, how many know how a password manager works? Raise your hand if you do. Okay. So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, basically it's a place where you store all of your passwords. It's multi-factor authenticated, secure, so that if you go to log into it, what you want to have is a second factor so that if you log in, you have to essentially get a notification on your phone, you have to put the code in, and then you can gain access to your password manager. So it's like your bank in a way. Okay, never reuse passwords or use passwords for more than one account. That's tempting because how many accounts do we have? 300, 500? How many software as a service do we have? Don't enter passwords on sites that aren't encrypted. We're going to talk a little bit later about how do we know what that means, what is encrypted. This is a big one, and I find this to be a way that a lot of people get hacked. Never log in from somebody else's device, even if it's your cousin or your brother or your daughter or whatever it is. You don't know what networks that their computer is connected to, and in the past, you don't know what malicious code they may have on their computer. So it's just a really bad idea. Never email passwords. Never log into accounts over a public Wi-Fi connection that you don't know is secure. So I'm logged into the pdq.com guest user here, but I'm not logging into any of my passwords from here, even though I'm 99.99% sure. She'll say 100% sure, right? It's secure, but for best practice, I'm not going to do any banking while I'm here over my connection. And if I would tether to my phone. I would turn off my Wi-Fi on my phone, and I would tether to this so that I'm using an actual phone connection, not public Wi-Fi. And then use two-factor, multi-factor authentication whenever possible. Yes, please.
Like the password manager that's part of the
Or like keychain, yeah, on Mac. I don't think it's as secure as one of these password managers, right? Because if somebody gets access to your device, then essentially they have access to your passwords, right? So you actually if they had your password to get into your device, so for someone to get into my LastPass, they would have to get access to my device, somehow hack that, somehow get my username and password for LastPass, and have my phone for the multi-factor. So it's a lot more secure. Yeah. So I'm kind of against things being dependent upon that device. Plus, if you ever lost that device, then what? If you misplaced it or whatever, or say the drive just goes out on it. Yeah, you bet. Personally, I think it's okay, and I think I'll let Ben address this a little bit more because I would use it to search Google, just surf the web, but I'm not going to log into any accounts over public Wi-Fi myself. Now, Ben may have some other ideas. There, you could use what's called a VPN, a virtual private network, to access the Wi-Fi. But I personally don't like to do that. I personally just save my logging into things for when I'm at a secure connection. Okay, we'll have a little Q&A at the end too. So the other thing is to be cautious about who has access to your login credentials to your website. This guy is Kevin Mitnick, and he actually is a former hacker who served some prison time in the late 90s for hacking several large companies. And now he's a security consultant making a whole lot of money. And he's a public speaker and author. And he said if an attacker wants to break into a system, the most effective approach is to try to exploit the weakest link, not operating systems, firewalls, or encryption algorithms, but people. And that's true. People, we are the weakest link when it comes to passwords. So if you're going to be cautious about who has access, that means on your like if you have a WordPress site, you're going to want to regularly clean up and revisit admin accounts, old accounts, get rid of those. If you have an employee, or say you have a manager of one of your stores and they have an admin account for your WordPress site and they leave, you want to make sure that you immediately disable that, not because they would necessarily do anything to mess with your site, but if their email address becomes abandoned, then it could get hacked and it just becomes a vulnerability. So people don't always maintain their Gmail addresses or Yahoo addresses or whatever. So if that's the email address associated with an admin account in your WordPress or any website for that matter, it could be compromised that way. You want to make sure anybody who has access to your website abides by your company's cybersecurity policy, which leads me to tip 3, which is have a company cybersecurity policy. Now, raise your hand if you do have one. I don't think, okay, a couple people do, right? 4 people do. I have one. I have to have one because we're a digital marketing agency, but a lot of companies don't. And it doesn't have to be an extensive cybersecurity policy, but 1 page, right? Just basics. But you need to have emotional and mental buy-in by your employees that they are part of the solution in helping protect the whole company's IT infrastructure. Okay, tip 3. Anybody know what this is? Is this now very just cryptic? All right, so SSL, HTTPS. Basically, what is this? Well, you've probably been to some websites that you see, it says not secure, or it won't have a little lock symbol on it. You want to make sure your website has the little lock symbol, and then importantly, it has HTTPS. S stands for secure. This is a signal that you have a properly configured encrypted website. Okay, so make sure you have an valid SSL certificate. And your website hosting company or whoever's managing your website will know all of this. You can call them and say, I need to make sure I have this. And just so you know, an SSL certificate is a digital certificate that authenticates a website's identity and enables an encrypted connection. They actually issue a little digital certificate, and that's what you're looking at. So if you ever come across a site and you see that it doesn't have that, and it says not secure, by all means, don't put your credit card information in there. Don't do business with that company, is my advice. I think it's a trust signal. So if you don't have a secure site, it's sort of a signal to other companies that you're not, number one, keeping up with your IT, and you just don't know what's going on, right? You don't know if the site's compromised. So any questions on SSL and HTTPS before I go on? Okay, so now those are the tips that apply to everybody. Now there's a few tips that only apply to people that have what we call open source CMS sites. So what type of website do you have? A content management system is an application on your website that allows multiple contributors to create, edit, and publish content on your website. So how many of you have what's called a hosted CMS? It's one of these on the left-hand side. Raise your hand if your website is either Squarespace, Wix, Blogger, any of these. I think, Jason, yours is Squarespace, right? Yeah, you're on WordPress, yeah. Most people have WordPress sites, or there's a few with Joomla and Drupal. I think Babs, yours used to be Joomla, yeah. It's not surprising, 65% of websites are WordPress sites, 65% with an identifiable CMS. So these next tips really relate to anybody with a WordPress site. You're going to definitely want to make sure you are paying attention to these. Choose a good hosting provider. This is really, really important. So who can name a few hosting providers? Just shout some out. Just what hosting providers can you name? Xmission? Google, yeah. Bluehost. Any others? GoDaddy? Yeah, that's actually one. Yes, that is. So if you're paying less than $15 a month for hosting, it's probably not what I would call enterprise level hosting company. It's going to be a hosting, not a business level hosting plan, essentially. You want to make sure that your hosting company provides automatic daily backups of your website. So if something does happen and your site does get attacked and you have to restore to a previous version of your website, that can easily be done. And then you want to look for a hosting company with exceptional customer support for non-techies. How do you do that, right? Well, I've got a list of hosting companies I recommend. We don't receive any compensation from any of the hosting companies we recommend. We just have ones that are favorites that we like to do work with. And I can, if you talk to me after, I can give you sort of a short list of ones that we think are worth the money. All right. Number 5, WordPress core and plugins. 98% of WordPress vulnerabilities come from outdated plugins. What's an outdated plugin? Well, because WordPress releases a new core version about once a month, and plugins may release a new version every couple of weeks, it might be a plugin that's 2 months old. So it's really a good idea to once a month, or at least once a quarter, go through and make sure all your plugins and your WordPress version is up to date. Let's see. So that's about the frequency. For certain high-level sites, you might do it more often. One of the things we do when we manage a WordPress site for someone is we do a compatibility check first to make sure that updating this plugin isn't going to break something with this version of WordPress core. I recommend checking that, those little notes that you see when it says before you update, check this out. I recommend that. And then do a complete end-to-end test of your website after you update, right? Don't just click update and go, okay, I'm good, because there is a chance that it will break something. Certain times you'll run into incompatibilities. So you want to do a front-to-end test, including testing your forms. If it's an e-commerce site, test making a purchase, that kind of thing. Use extra layers of security. We won't get into too much of this, but firewalls. There's a firewall called Security that I'll highly recommend. And somebody mentioned Cloudflare earlier. Cloudflare is a great thing. It's essentially a content delivery network that distributes the load of your server such that your server isn't just centrally located. It's serving your website from multiple locations throughout the country and throughout the world. So this is a much better way to go. WordFence is a plugin I highly recommend for WordPress users. You can configure this to add 100 times better security than without it. It serves as a little bit of a firewall. It can help you with brute force attacks. And if you just go on and search WordFence in the WordPress plugin directory, this is a really good plugin. It's got a free version, and there's a paid version that's even better. Tip 7, cyber insurance. So why do I recommend cyber insurance? Well, because there's always the weakest link. So no matter how good your firewalls and encryption and antivirus software is, you've got that one guy, right? So there's no match for all of that. There's always going to be the weakest link, and cyber insurance is going to help. Finally, last tip, hire a website development firm or a security firm. If you feel overwhelmed and you feel like you need some additional help, don't be afraid to reach out. It's a really good investment. And maybe you just need them to run a vulnerability scan on your site, find out if you have any major vulnerabilities, and fix some of the critical problems, and you just need a little help for a little while to manage it. But that's a really good investment of time. So final thought on websites. It's not a one-time task to keep your website secure. It's an ongoing task, and technology is always changing. So my recommendation is to, if you don't want to hire somebody to manage your site yourself, subscribe to the WordFence blog. WordFence actually has an amazing blog where every day they release some information on a new vulnerability that they've uncovered with specifically related to WordPress. So subscribe to their blog, get the updates. If getting those freaks you out and you go, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff out there that's scary, then seek maybe the help of a web development firm, a webmaster. A lot of people can do this, and you can do all of this WordPress security yourself. It's just, as you can tell, very time consuming. So that's sort of my final thought for now. Thank you.